Hi, I'm Jeremy, and I'm dying.
Okay, that's not the reaction you were expecting, was it? But these guys are taking a different approach in dealing with life setbacks, and they don't keep it among themselves either. They have a podcast. Brian Stever and Jeremy Saunders, who you heard from briefly in that little video clip, create the podcast called Sickboy, and they've joined us today from Halifax. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi, Diana.
All right, so Jeremy, let me start with you, because I gather that a lot of the podcast is actually about your personal experience. Give us a sense of that.
Yeah, so essentially the idea behind the podcast was to sit down with two of my best friends and essentially share my experience of what it's been like to live with a chronic illness or a terminal illness. I do that because my two best friends, Brian and Taylor, they make me laugh unlike anybody else in my life. And I find that laughter is a huge form of therapy for myself. But then the show sort of snowballed from there, and it grew into something a little bit larger where we started talking to other people living with other chronic or terminal illnesses to hear their experience and to be able to relate to each other.
And very quickly, what is your ailment? Can you tell us?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I live with cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease that affects multi-systems in the body, primarily the lungs and the pancreas.
Okay, so Brian, I mean, we listened to Jeremy talk about it. How do you feel? I mean, we see you guys sort of, trying to stifle a laugh when he says, "I'm dying."
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy and Taylor and I, it's something that we talk about occasionally, and laughing about Jeremy's illness is a way that helps him deal with it, and it's a way that we've become comfortable talking about it. So for us, it's just kind of become natural. And one of the points we like to make is we're not laughing about the illness itself. We're laughing at the funny things or experiences that you have in dealing with those illnesses. So.
Yeah, we're laughing about the absurdity of all of it.
Right.
And Jeremy, how are people reacting to it? Do people get what you're trying to get across?
So far, I think they get it. We haven't had any real negative response. Most people have responded. Most people who are sick have responded and have been really thankful that there's a discussion going on that's not super sugar-coated, something that's just real and raw and not trying to pretend to be something that it's not. And most people who aren't sick that have listened and have given feedback feel the same way. They just feel grateful that there's this resource out there for them to hear people's experiences and not feel like it's, again, sugar-coated or fake.
I think initially we were concerned that some people might not relate to our sense of humor, and we were happy to hear that after the first few episodes came out that people were laughing at the same things that we were laughing at, and that made us a lot more optimistic about the future of the podcast.
And Jeremy, I gather it's not only about your experience, but you've had people on the show who are dealing with all sorts of other issues too, and trying to get them to talk about it.
Yeah, we've had people on the show who have been dealing with everything from brain cancer to bipolar to type 1 diabetes to PTSD and psychosis. Really, we're not limiting ourselves to talking about, we're not limiting ourselves to any illness. We really want to cover the whole spectrum of what it means to be sick and all the different experiences out there.
And Brian, I guess, today, very poignantly, as we're remembering people who have been to war and people who've come back and are dealing with PTSD, did you find yourself learning from the guests that you had on talking about that in particular? Was there something that you didn't expect to hear?
Yeah, I had a really profound realization with that. For me, my best way of connecting with other people is by empathizing with them. And our guest on that episode, he said very specifically that he didn't want people to express empathy towards him. So for me, it was really difficult because I found like it was harder for me to connect with him. But the profound realization came in the fact that people deal with things differently, and no matter what, there might be multiple people dealing with PTSD, but in very different ways. And it's not it's the experience of the individual. And I realized I had to check myself and make sure that I'm understanding where they're coming from as much as I want to connect that way with them.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I mean, it's one of the best parts of my job is talking to people because you always learn. You always learn about
Right.
the human condition. Jeremy, I mean, it's sort of an understanding that it can be cathartic to talk about something that's painful or difficult and that humor can help. But how else has the podcast helped you?
I think it's just really solidified how I feel about living life and how I feel about knowing that statistically I probably won't live as long as Brian or my other best friend Taylor, who's on the show with us as well. I feel like I have a really unique worldview on how I live my life, knowing that CF is a fatal disease. And the more I do this podcast and the more I hear other people's experiences and the more that I laugh with these guys, the more I feel good about my situation. And yeah.
That's great. And you know, the other good thing about my job when it's live is that I get to kind of say whatever I want, which is, I'm really glad that you joined us. And why don't you take a chance, Brian, to promote the podcast, tell people where they can find it.
You can check out the podcast on iTunes by searching Sickboy Podcast, or you can visit our website, sickboypodcast.com. And check us out on Facebook. And right now we're trying to promote the podcast and reach as big of an audience as possible. And if you like our Facebook page or rate and review and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, then that's going to help us spread our message around the globe.
Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We've been talking with Brian Stever and Jeremy Saunders, who joined us in Halifax.